the most part, I'm trying to keep this part short to give you a little bit of an idea of where we are. For those that I have not met yet, my name is George Proakis. I'm Director of Planning here for the City of Somerville. I am here with the team tonight from Principal Group in Utiel that are two consulting team firms that are part of a group that the City of Somerville has put together to try to build a neighborhood plan for Union Square, including Boynton Yards, including areas that are going to be developed by a developer we're working with, as well as a whole lot of area beyond that. These consulting folks that are working with me have worked with us before on doing neighborhood plan work and have been really helpful to getting that neighborhood plan to happen. In addition to that, there has been a developer that has been selected by the Somerville Redevelopment Authority, the US2 Union Square team that is doing their own work on particular development parcels that they have been designated for. And as they go forward, as we work to finish a neighborhood plan, they're going to take that process and move forward with their own plans for how to develop the pieces that would be under their control. But that's kind of not quite where we are here tonight. Tonight we're talking still about the neighborhood plan as a whole, and we're doing an open house meeting that gives us some feedback from the event, the charrette event that we did in March, as well as the lessons that we have learned since then that we are going to share with you. Now, this is the last of the announced meetings to date on the neighborhood plan process. This is not going to be the last meeting on the neighborhood plan process. We're working towards creating a plan draft this fall. As we do so, we are working to dig deeper and deeper into these ideas and continue to generate feedback on the things that are important to us to get feedback on. So we're doing a meeting tonight. We've refined a lot of ideas about what the impacts are, particularly in the Boynton Yards side of the development, including the D3 block for those who kind of follow the development blocks that the developer is doing. On the other development blocks and some of the rest of Union Square, we've put up some design principles and some ideas that are on the boards. We're looking to get feedback on that so that we can come back with a more refined version of that. There will be another open house meeting, probably mid to end of June. We're working on the date. There will, and so from there, if there are topics that come out of these meetings that are important, we'll do meetings on those topics, and we'll dive deeper into that with the idea of working towards coming back with a draft of a plan that we will show you all for feedback in the fall. So that's where we are at this point. I am going to turn it over to Russ Preston from Principal Group, who's going to give you a little bit of perception on kind of where we are and some of the ideas we've gotten. Before I do that, I do want to mention that in addition to the process that we do here, there's also a civic advisory committee. That group has been working steadily to help develop a general guidance for how to work with the developer in the redevelopment process in Union Square. Wig Zamor and Ann Tate, who I believe are here, are co-chairs of that committee. They met as recently as last night. And if you have questions about that whole process.
So a lot of what we're showing tonight is refinement from what we heard at the charrette and the feedback that we got during the charrette and after the charrette. So these are still ideas in generation in draft form. So what we're going to do now, and the reason we don't have enough chairs is to make this presentation quick. I wanted to have everyone stand. So we're going to give you a kind of brief overview, and then we're going to do question and answers. But while we're doing question and answers, I want to have the opportunity so folks can actually go up and look at the details if you haven't already. So that'll be the format for the presentation and the rest of the evening. Really, I want to thank everyone on this board, all the folks who have helped out through this process. This has been a really engaging process, and we've been having a lot of fun with it. The food trucks and live music was kind of the icing on the cake tonight. So just if you see these folks tonight, they've really burned the midnight oil the last few months getting all this done, so I really want to thank them. And then, other parts of the team that have ongoing work around the neighborhood that many of you have probably been to meetings on, we've been talking and meeting with them in parallel. So a lot of that thinking we're trying to coordinate. Some of that might not be 100% coordinated yet, but in the next few weeks and month or so, we'll hopefully do that. And then US2, the master developer, their process is going to start as we finish up our plan draft. So that'll be later in the summer, early fall. And there's a number of US2 folks here, Greg and Eric. So we can talk more about that. We have a number of development objectives that are in draft form that we're going to come back later on in June and talk in much more detail about. But we wanted to give you kind of a preview of where we were at with that tonight. So schedule very quickly. Some things have shifted since we last saw each other, and this is a complex slide, but just, where we're at right now is this red bar, and we're nearing, sort of the end of our public process that's been announced, and we'll be putting out a draft later in sort of October, September. And then US2 will begin their public process on the refinement of the architecture and the specific development sites. And you can see there's a lot of other things going on in parallel with this that we've been trying to keep coordinated and kind of tie together through the neighborhood plan. So what do we hear? We've heard a lot from you folks over the last few months. And we wanted to kind of, a big thing we heard with some of the renderings and drawings that we did during the charrette was that that's not quite the right architecture for Union Square. So we went back and really looked at all of the visual preference surveys and pulled out the best ones, the ones that everyone liked, the ones that people really enjoyed and made a lot of positive comments on. So these are just a few of them here. And that will be posted online soon. We've got that all bundled into a PDF so you can review all of that. But this is sort of what resonated with folks as hopeful images for the future of Union Square. And then something about this, we put some storefronts in there because a lot of discussion was about the street life and the sort of funky nature of the retail that's in Union Square. And we're trying to dial down how to actually code this or encourage this through regulation so that this kind of very tiny nuances on the street and the sidewalk and how things spill out into the public realm can occur and be encouraged. And then a lot of discussion about how do we use these remnant spaces came out of a lot of the discussion to date. And this remote is not playing well with us here. So pay attention to those benches. The Parklet was a big fan, the idea of using the streets, and you can see a lot of the public space work we've been doing is looking at how can we reclaim space for people. So we want to hear your feedback on that if we're getting that right. And then these tighter spaces, these more unique spaces that might occur in some of the nooks and crannies around the neighborhood, or in addition, how these streets might be envisioned in the future in Boyne Yards or some of the redevelopment parcels. I'm blocking a few views, so I'm going to step back. And then this idea of shared space. We've talked about this a number of times, but we really want to think about how we can use this street type, this public space type, to find even more open space and use better, more productive uses out of the existing right-of-way in the street. So just to get our bearings, there's been a lot of words, redevelopment parcels, D parcels, transformation districts. All of that needed to go on a map so we could kind of guide ourselves. And tonight we're going to talk about Boyne Yards, which is this pink color. And then we're going to talk about the public space network, which is sort of throughout the whole neighborhood. When we come back in June, we'll talk more specifically about the Union Square transformation area, which is this blue, which includes the development parcels, Target, and then sort of this area down near McGrath Highway, which we've been calling Grand Junction, otherwise known as Pat's Towing Site. So that just to orient everyone. So it's sort of south side of the railroad tracks and north side. Most of tonight's discussion is around the south side of the tracks, which is Boyne Yards. So Boyne Yards has been targeted as a transformation district in the city's comprehensive plan. What does that mean? That means this is a place to create jobs and to create high-density commercial, office, research, and encourage a 24-hour neighborhood with residential. In addition to that, a lot of feedback we got was where do we find open space? And where do we find open space that can be programmed for Little League soccer or yoga or just a nice passive park and have all that happening at once? So we've tried to find that space, and really the only two locations to put substantial new parks is in Boyne Yards, or you might see this as Target. The retrofit and the sort of, the rebuilding of a walkable Target site rather than a sort of car-oriented Target site would allow us to add a lot of open space as well as an additional amounts of redevelopment parcels for commercial and and retail space. And this is just to orient you, that's sort of the rethought of Target, a brand new big park, and then a future connection into Boyne Yards, which would make a finer network, where you have more options to get around the neighborhood. And then Boyne Yards, just to orient everyone, this is Webster Street here. And of course, we forgot street names again, just to confuse everyone. And then here, looking at this is the existing building that Tots of Chocolate is in. And we've looked at building sort of two parallel road networks in and out of Boyne Yards. And then this is sort of going over towards Medford is that cluster of existing fabric of residential buildings. There's a few old mill buildings. We've more or less, stayed away from that and started Boyne Yards sort of kind of inboard of that. So this is the Gentle Giant site around here, just to orient everyone. And then the idea that these buildings would all front on that, and this would be the sort of the culmination of density, perhaps. This is where the height would occur, which puts it away from all of the existing residential fabric. So we don't have to worry about shadows or light. And then another point about this plan is the parking structures we've tried to orient towards the railroad track and at the edges of the neighborhood so that cars are not, there's not a traffic congestion within the neighborhood. You're probably wondering where the farms go. That was something that was really important to us. We heard a lot of questions about that. And urban agriculture is really important to this community. So we've consolidated them and enlarged them into a centralized farm in this space, which offers a nice gateway transition between the sort of office, commercial district and the residential streets and blocks adjacent to it. So during the charrette, we came up with a scenario, which was kind of our first pass. This is that scenario where we've gone in and looked at it a little bit more detail, and that's pinned up. But from there, we started looking at what's the job creation potential and what's the open space potential. So we've refined this version, which really looks at the current zoning heights and the sort of allowable densities that are on the site as a projection for what could occur there. So you'll see here in the top left, this is sort of the Somerville, Summer Vision objectives summarized. And then in the bottom right, we've done some initial fiscal impact studies on this scenario, and that's those results. There's a lot going on here, and I want to spend a little time talking about it, but you can see here, this is the sort of primary pedestrian sort of spine through this neighborhood. Boyne Yards, and this is maybe Boyne Square, perhaps. And then we've also added another small square at this intersection, which I'll show you in a minute. The idea being that you have a sequence of public spaces that's connected through a very pedestrian-oriented street, perhaps a shared space. And that these office buildings and commercial buildings, the lower rise are envisioned as residential or perhaps hotel, spill out onto this street so that this really becomes not a 9 to 5 neighborhood, but a real mixed-use neighborhood that has life to it on the weekends and in the evenings. And then you can see here at the far end, this third public space is the consolidated farm and agriculture, perhaps with what I've been calling a maker barn. Boston has its innovation center. Somerville might be more progressive and have something cooler than that. And then you see here that some of these buildings have funny shapes, and that's because we're trying to work within the existing sort of ownership and lot line fabric, which if you look at a lot of the previous studies of Boyne Yards, it kind of didn't really think about that. I think that was a concern for us. We thought, well, what happens if as New Englanders, we always look at ownership and you get these cranky streets and these kind of interesting buildings. And that is a result of some of these building shapes, is looking really at the historic patterns on the land. And that's how this plan has been elevated and shaped. So the next scenario is what we're calling the public common scenario. So as I said earlier, this is a spot to get substantial open space. This is about a 4 to 5 acre park. You can see if you, I'm going to go back and forth real quick. You can notice the building heights coming up. So what we tried to do is still have the same type of program, the amount of square footage, the amount of office, but create more parkland. And this scenario actually had, in order to do that, a number of these buildings need to elevate beyond the currently allowed height limit. So that was an important point to discuss with everyone. So you can see here the public space, open space, doesn't go up by that much, surprisingly. And it's essentially, we've consolidated a number of smaller open spaces into this large open space. And we'd like to hear from you what happens there. Is this, is this a soccer field or is this a public common? There's a number of ways that this park could be organized. And then you see here also, orienting ourselves across the train tracks to a future potential for the target site. In both of these plans, we get a really interesting public space network that can occur. So this almost becomes a green districts of sorts. So that's something we've been really thinking about, and that might have implications all the way down to district heating, district energy solutions, a really smart district. And then you can see the fiscal impact analysis here. There's some change where the zoning height scenario has some larger, some benefit, but not much. This is Boyne Yards today. This is sort of, here's the street here, how it interacts. So another part of what we've been looking at is, okay, how does the redevelopment parcels need to behave in the context of the larger neighborhood discussion? And we've been calling those development objectives. And you can see here that this green space network, we've been trying to pull up into the neighborhood, resulting in the sort of, the plaza here at the heart of Union Square. So D3 is part of Boyne Yards, so we've looked at that a little bit more thoroughly than the other redevelopment parcels, because it really has to do something interesting, which is turn the corner to the station, as well as hold some of the parking. It's one of the larger sites, so it has the potential for substantial office, commercial, research, as well as parking, which is envisioned sort of in the center of this block here. So this is what we're calling development objective diagram. So these are pinned up on the boards, and you should really spend time reading these red circles and what they relate to the plan. This alternative and this alternative are looking at different types of buildings. An office research building compared to a hotel or a residential building, as well as how the parking might be consolidated differently. So we wanted to start to test this, so our design objectives provided some development and design objectives provided flexibility so that these parcels could respond to the market, as well as accommodate substantial office if needed, as well as fit into the hopes, dreams, visions of the neighborhood of what we've heard. So those are all on the boards around here, so please spend some time looking at these sentences and let us know if you have questions or thoughts on them. So D3 is very interesting because you have to sort of turn this corner from the station. It's really the gateway into Boyne Yards. So this view, if you go there today, is not all that friendly to pedestrians. But in the future, it might be something like this. And you can see, here's the existing building. And really envisioning this street as a public space, where life can spill out onto it. And then you see here, sort of cafe and then commercial above. And then these sort of possibilities for courtyards or courtyards above parking decks to occur, which this stair is going up into. So shifting over to Union Square, just to give you quickly the summary of the development parcels there. It's interesting to look, these blue are sort of office floor plates, what we've looked at as larger commercial floor plates. And we've tried to organize those to respect height because they need to be bigger, larger buildings. But so with D4, it makes most sense here to add a park to this small triangular site at Prospect and Webster. And for a variety of reasons. One is that we'll get to later, but this green line you're seeing in the plan is a potential new rail trail that we've been able to map. And this would be a great sort of trailhead to get on and off of that route. And then also looking at the sort of Flatiron where CrossFit currently is as a very interesting sort of unique building parcel for something that could be kind of a nice two sides of this street and really help create a nice retail moment here and a gateway in and out of the square. The third thing you'll notice is it's really important that D2 steps back for a sight line to the station, as well as create a meaningful civic space there, sort of station square, that can hold a variety of community activities. So looking at D4 in more detail, we have a very similar analysis, which I think is on that board back there. And we can, we're happy to take questions on that. So across the street on D2, we've done a few studies on this, further refined from the charrette, but some key things that to keep in mind is here's that civic space, which has to resolve the sort of grade change from the bridge. We're really looking at two building structures with a break in the center. That break could occur at any point, this sort of laneway that we're calling it. The idea that any height should be set back away from Prospect. So this is one version. Here's a second version. So this is the view this last winter. This is the view in the not too distant future. This is this train station here as it's currently designed. And this is the redevelopment of D2. This is the redevelopment of D6. This is a small sort of pocket park with a civic pavilion in it. You can just see D4 coming out of the trees there. And that's over in Inman Square, that existing tower. And you can see here the entrance to the station. Everyone had a lot of comments about this image initially, so we've brought down, we've shifted height around, we've set back, we've added more storefront life, really thought a lot about how the street level works. So this has been refined since the charrette. Now, jumping across Somerville Ave to D1, everyone sort of agreed that D1's a sort of super block and that needed to be broken down into two pieces with this lane. And there's some still questions about should it be that lane occur here or here. Second thing is the view corridor to the post office is actually a pretty significant feature of the neighborhood. So by setting back D1, we can sort of preserve this vegetated sort of, Ricky's sort of exploding onto the sidewalk as it currently is today. And we're showing that here as sort of a unique feature of this site. So you can see here there's a number of buildings can exist on this site. Centralized parking. This is actually a really good location to do sort of district parking for the whole neighborhood, get a substantial number of cars there. This is also a good location for a commercial building, office, research lab, or hotel. So we've looked at a number of different scenarios for that. This one testing more height along Somerville Ave, sort of pushing the height away from the views from Prospect Hill. This is looking at a different version of a hotel or residential building with a wrapped parking structure. And then a library. We heard everyone said, where'd the library go? So we thought this is also an interesting location for the library, which has a number of challenges that we still need to work through. But sort of, the post office library sort of fronting on the civic square was a nice relationship. So these are all testing the same development objectives. So just to see how these sites can be flexible but still meet all of the community's goals. So D5 is really just sort of repairing the missing teeth along Washington Street. I think the big thing is how this building relates to the post office, and then how this building relates to the residential behind, as well as sort of keep that street corridor intact. So this is a view from sort of just across the street here. And this is a future scenario. And you can see here, the same view of the post office. This is that sort of pavilion on the new park at D6. Here's the plaza and Ricky's existing canopy and public life on there. And then here's D1. which we think should be up to a 5-6 story building to really keep that framing of the main plaza at a nice scale. So jumping across the street here is D6. You can see the pavilion, the new park. And then this is a nice site for sort of lower scale office or hotel. And then this particular has to do a number of things. It has to front this residential street, but also hold a very important corner. So we've been looking at that this development should actually ramp up in height as you get to the corner of Prospect and Somerville. And then there should definitely be a mid-block connection. That was something we heard loud and clear from everyone, that this sort of desire line walking up to the future train station. And then step down to the existing historic fabric there on Somerville Ave. So this scenario is looking at a larger office building that consolidates parking inside and is office on essentially 3 or 4 sides. And then this version, we've looked at in perspective as well. This is today, and this is in the future. So here, what you see here is D6. There's D2. There's the small pavilion at the new park. Here's the mid-block break. We've enlarged the sidewalk along Somerville Ave by setting this building back some on D6. And then we can talk further about the public space ideas here, shown in a minute. So stepping back, how does this all frame the square from sort of the intersection of Webster, Washington, and sort of Somerville Ave? And this is how we see that. This is the redesigned intersection here that adds substantial new plaza space. There you see the SCAT building. And here's D6 rising up. And there's D1 in the background. And we think this is really, this character of plaza space, it's not lots of green space, but it really adds a lot of acreage of things that can happen in the public realm that currently are just leftover pavement and ill-performing sort of pork chop sidewalk space. So we think this is really a great solution for how that intersection will resolve itself and actually create a real place there out of the sidewalks. And here's that in plan. So D7 is directly adjacent to that, which is an excellent location for housing, just with its context and the size of the shape of the lot. And this is envisioned as sort of retail with housing above coming up the street, and then more sort of residential or community space on the ground floor. It would also be great to get the historic floors back on that building at the corner of Somerville and Bow. But we can dream. So now we've stepped back and looked at the public space network. The CAC has really talked about a 20-acre goal, 25-acre goal, and we tried really hard to hit that. And we've done that a number of ways. In the core of Union Square, it's through reclaiming the street. So this is existing, and this is new. So the proposed here looks at a redesign and retrofit of the existing plaza so that it functions better. It does better things for the public markets, does better things for the events, still allows the parking to occur, introduces some green space, provides crossing for Somerville Ave. Then moving up to this sort of main intersection that's currently really difficult for pedestrians to cross, we've added these large plaza spaces and rationalized this intersection into essentially a 4-way typical intersection. And then this plaza space connects now into Bow Street, which could culminate in a new plaza up here near the turn in Bow Street. And this is accomplished by making Somerville Ave 2-way, which creates a much more economically beneficial condition for Main Street retail, which is really the sort of core Somerville Ave section is really a Main Street condition. So just by adding that 2-way traffic here, the number of cars that will not be doing this movement any longer allows this to really develop into a unique public space. And then what you also see here is this rationalizing of these inner courtyards. There's several of them that could be further explored. This one the community has already done a great job looking at. And there's others around the neighborhood, perhaps the one in the back here as well. So this all sort of zooms out to a bikeway and sort of mobility network that comes into the square and uses cycle tracks to really navigate this very interesting streetscape, which you can see here, the existing, proposed. And this cycle track is coming through over to Washington Street to the community path and into the regional network. This on the ground, is pretty dramatic. Look at all the sort of public life that can occur. The cycle track here, really thinking about from the sort of existing fabric on this side of the square, a unified design all the way to the other side of the square. And then Bow Street, today, all that pavement width for cars, some of it brought back for people. And we got a lot of feedback on this sketch from the charrette that it didn't really feel like Union Square, so there are those benches everyone liked. We sort of really worked on how should these public spaces and these seatings clusters interact. So stepping back, just sort of wrapping up on the open spaces, what happens in Boyne Yards? If you look at the 5-minute walk from all of your existing parks, it's really obvious where another one should go. And if you look at that network of public space, here, if just zooming in back on Boyne Yards here, this is what we're calling the zoning height scenarios network of public space. And then all of these in bright green are the proposed new public spaces in that network. And that gets us to 21.56 acres of new public space throughout the Boyne Yards and Union Square neighborhood. Then there's that rail trail that we've been able to map that connects to the regional network and perhaps all the way up into Porter. And then the second scenario, the public common scenario, is 22.8 acres. And you can see the consolidation of that sort of neighborhood scale park. So, just in summary, this is where we're at to date with Boyne Yards and kind of the thinking around the public space in Union Square and how the buildings need to behave with that new public space. So with that, we're going to shift into question and answer and discussion. And if folks want to take a look at the boards, I'd encourage them to do that now. So question and answer, this is a big group, so we're going to do this in a easy manner. So if you have a question, I'd invite you to come up and write it down on a piece of white paper here, and then I will read that out. If you feel comfortable reading it out, you're welcome to as well. And then folks from our team are going to tape those onto a board or the wall, perhaps the wall back there. And so we're going to take about 5 minutes to get all the questions pulled together. And then we'll cluster the questions that might be the same and talk about those in sequence.
If you want to stay and participate in question and discussion around the circle here, we encourage that and we welcome you. If you have to go, take a chance, look at the boards, fill out a feedback survey if you get a chance. If you don't even get a chance to do that, look at somervillebydesign.com. In the next couple days, we're going to put the presentation up. It has all the boards with the development principle stuff for each lot that kind of describes the big picture perspective on what you can do on the D block, so that's particularly important.
First cluster of questions we're going to tackle is transportation. So, Corey, the first.
But the first transportation question was, where do the bus stops go? That's certainly an important piece of it. We will dig a little deeper into that in the next round of our looking at the design.
What's our next topic?
Open space.
Open space, okay. So why not put the huge public park, which I love, in parentheses, in the middle of the Union, in the middle of Union instead of in Boynton Yards, or in addition to? There is no land to put a 5-acre site in Union Square. The cost of putting a park in Boynton or in Target at 5 acres substantially different than putting a 2-acre park in the center of Union. So that trade-off we've looked at, but if people, the benefit of having it over here is that it can be a 5-acre parcel if we're going to shift it to, say, D1 or a portion of one of the redevelopment sites, we're not going to get that large of a centralized green space. Yeah, next.
I appreciate that urban agriculture is being included in Boynton Yards. Is there any way to keep existing farm space in farm use? Farmers have been planting perennials, plants and trees, and investing in that space. Moving to a new space creates challenges.
And then this question is, how would the urban ag space be managed? Would South Street Farm and the Youth Green Team still have a space there? Those are all good questions and all things we still need to work out, but the idea is that we would look at the new space that's larger and consolidated to improve the existing programs and facilities. So that's currently the strategy with the plan for the agriculture.
Our goal is to leave everybody better off than they are, and we're committed to working towards doing that. But every way you kind of look at the geometry of Boynton Yards, it makes it really difficult to kind of carve those pieces out and make it work. And our hope is we can carve out something that's even better, and we're committed to working with the advocates who are doing it to try to get there.
Follow-up question. Where do the rest of and new farms go? Answer, up on the roof. A zoning initiative, please, for all new buildings capable of supporting urban agriculture. What's the idea about that?
So we have shown some green roofs. That's really a program that the city can recommend. In Boynton Yards, we've looked at a few of these parking structures having green roofs. So I think that's an initiative that we need to discuss further, and it's an idea that we've definitely started to embed into the plan. We've also looked at other, new potential for agriculture on D2, definitely on the existing remains on D4. And a number of these other new public spaces we haven't really programmed yet, so those need to be explored further for agriculture. So, next question, what do you propose for the involvement of youth in terms of sports or youth-centered, etc.? The plan looks very modern and targeted at adults, perhaps. So we've had a number of discussions about how this can be a friendly pedestrian experience for a fourth grader, and we've had a few discussions with neighbors about friendly walks to school, which we're planning to map so that this public space network that we're discussing will actually keep in mind that that children need to be able to function in the neighborhood as well. So we've thought about that. What specifically for youth? I mean, other than playgrounds, ball fields, and the like, we want to hear more from you all. What's missing as far as youth is concerned? So that's a good question.
We're going to switch topics to jobs and job creation. First question, why a hotel?
That's a good question. We've heard from the master developer who's been talking to a lot of folks that the hotel market is constrained in the Boston market and that people are interested in locating a hotel in Union Square. So there's a market demand for that. Also, that complements a job center as well. Hotels in proximity to research and commercial facilities tend to work well together. So that's a commercial use that we've looked at.
What's being done to ensure existing small businesses will have a place in the new Union Square? Much of the development seems focused on office buildings for large companies.
So admittedly, we didn't. Oh yeah, that's an area of this whole discussion that we didn't get deep into tonight. But there has been a number of conversations, both conversations with the developer team doing development work, discussion amongst the Civic Advisory Committee and discussions of business. I don't know how deep they've gotten into that topic yet. We want to make sure both that we find ways to be supportive of the existing businesses in the square, and that we also make sure that as new areas develop, that those new areas develop not as sort of being the Galleria Mall without a roof. We want actual small local, something that isn't a copy of every place else. And it's important to get the small character, the businesses that are part of what make the character of Somerville so unique as a part of that piece. There are tools to do that. We haven't gotten deep enough into all of that yet. I think we've been very focused today on the design side of kind of the buildings. I think we will come back and look more into the policy side of what tools you can use to do that, both in terms of where that may be part of some benefits program or what zoning tools. For instance, we proposed a zoning tool that made it easier to establish local business than formula business in the zoning code overhaul we're working on. There are a number of different tools to do that, so we will keep it in our conversation as something that's important to us.
A simple idea is the width of a storefront that's allowed. Local retail and small business, really it's about how much they pay in month of rent. So if you go around to New York or Chicago, or a number of great successful main streets, is the width of a storefront is 24 to 38 feet, and that creates a scale of retail that can be manageable for small business. So I think that's one of the logics we're thinking about from a design standpoint. And then size, that there might be some larger retail spaces, but then some very small retail spaces that are important. And then from a management sort of policy standpoint, programs to help existing businesses stay and benefit from the economic growth in the square. So this is so last question here on jobs. We'll switch topic. Why are there not estimated square footages for commercial, not retail space? Can you include that for the various scenarios? Yes, we have those square footages and we will include them.
Yeah, we're broken down by office versus retail. We didn't put it on the slide, but we'll do that as we provide you more info.
Switching topics to affordable housing. In tonight's concept, what's the basic breakdown of the number of residential units and the number of square feet of commercial? Similar questions?
Is the percentage of commercial versus residential? I know the scenario we walked out of the charrette with was about a 65% commercial development scenario. I mean, we can take a look at where the refined versions went. I think they're relatively similar. They include a commercial and residential mix because we're trying to create neighborhoods, not places that are dead quiet either during the day or quiet at night. So the idea is like a Boynton Yards is meant to be a mix of commercial and residential. You can see the residential buildings are the lighter colored ones that sort of have the U shapes to them. The commercial buildings are the blue. The red on the first floor is the retail. So something like this shows, and there's a big range in those numbers, but if you look at the jobs, housing, retail numbers, you can kind of look at where they go in range. What we can do is what you got to do is you got to kind of convert the housing numbers to square footage and the jobs numbers to square footage to actually get a one-to-one calculation. But it appears to be about a little over 60 on the jobs and a little under 40 on the housing. But as we put these up, we can get more detailed numbers as we put them on the website to give you that information. And this is not like this is absolutely set in stone as what we would do, but it sets the basic parameters of how we would create rules for how this happens. Try to get that number right.
So this question, I like the zoning height scenario. What does it mean for affordable housing?
Well, I mean, we've had
I'm going to add a question that goes with that says, so people will be working, eating, shopping, biking, and farming in Somerville, but what about affordable housing? Who will be able to live here?
Sure, all very good, important questions. The answer to that question at this very moment in time is a little difficult. Our zoning that we have had in place here has a 12.5% affordable housing requirement citywide. It goes up to 15% in the transit-oriented districts, which includes the core of Boynton Yards. We proposed some further additions to those numbers in the zoning overhaul that we proposed to the Board of Aldermen starting in April. The zoning overhaul work is ongoing. It's a current conversation. It's running sort of in a parallel process with this. We do think that it's going to take another we're engaging in probably another 8 to 10 months of conversation on taking that draft we have today and making it an even better draft in the future. But as we go forward, we're looking at addressing what the percentage of required inclusionary affordable housing should be overall through the process and kind of how that breaks down. Could have a whole separate conversation on what our current proposal is, but our current proposal is to address a significant portion of having affordable housing as a part of the overall mix here. Well, and so the number of stories here ranges pretty significantly. The zoning work that was done in Union Square talked about a range that started at about 5 stories on the site that's D6, kind of in the core of Union Square, like where Mike's Auto is, and kind of in that block, and sort of went back into Boynton Yards, and at Boynton Yards imagined about 135-foot height. And those 135-foot heights that were set there have really set people's expectations and land values and opportunities there as we've gone forward. We've used those to kind of launch what we think is possible and tried to build our jobs housing numbers off of what was there and how that might work. We've shifted and adjusted some of the overall density around to try to make it work better from an urban design perspective and where and how that goes. What that does is, in order to get more open space, to get quality, the quality green spaces and stuff, there are a couple of spots where it pushes heights higher than those numbers, and the more you push those heights up, the more you get the opportunity to create the open space. And that was one of the things we were looking at with the 2 green space options in Boynton, was the trade-off between sort of putting the job-creating office space up higher in the buildings and getting more green space versus the other way around. I think, height is tricky. If you're down on the ground, you don't necessarily see it the same way you do from certain distances in certain places. There are lots of very tall buildings that the feeling on the ground of them can be like they're 2 or 3 stories if they're done right and their step backs are right and their basic design pieces work correctly. And then the other issue is kind of how you see them from a distance. A lot of what we've looked at is how you can position some of these from different angles in different directions so that you can kind of see through and between them in certain ways, and they kind of create their own look. Russ, you may have a better way of addressing some of these questions.
Yeah, we can come back to the height if there's a follow-up question. Is there a follow? So if you folks have a follow, there's a ton of questions back there. But if you have a follow-up question that's related to the discussion, just raise your hand. Go ahead.
Yep.
Just speak loud. Just speak loudly.
Yeah. Okay. My question was about where does the land that now has an electrical substation on it fit into the design? What is your plan to redevelop that site or reuse it in some way?
Thank you.
So that's come up a couple times. Even the idea of putting parking on top of it has been talked about. We haven't studied it yet, just because we haven't had time. But that's something we're going to look at.
That's sort of central. That's sort of right in the middle of the square, and it seems like that.
Yeah, it's a question of that. Does that parcel have the geometry that makes parking work well? And how do you get up to it, because it has to be above the substation?
Or can you put something else on top of it?
I don't know, but I will tell you this. The substation, the actual substation system is there to stay. It's not going anywhere. We're trying to figure out a way to mask it, hide it, use it, work with it to try to make something better be the visual experience of it. We haven't quite gotten all the answers on it yet, but we know that's an important piece of how we address it.
If folks are having a hard time hearing, feel free to move in, because a lot of seats are opening up.
Just read that one before I slide.
Just a quick question about that open space. Have you considered 4 acres at the transformer behind Dunkin' Donuts, and maybe increase that and forego a green space in Boynton Yards, and consider something closer to the historic center of the
If
square?
I go behind Dunkin' Donuts, I'm very quickly into a residential neighborhood though, and I'm not sure how successful I would be at pulling apart a residential neighborhood to create green space.
Right at Mike's Dunkin' Donuts, that corner there.
That's a tough site to get. I think we can talk. It's a complicated situation. We can dive more into it, but I think it wouldn't necessarily. It's right up on the busy street. It doesn't kind of create the central green that the Boynton solution does, but it's a possibility.
Russ, are you ready?
Yeah, go ahead.
Have you thought about building entries in Boynton Yards? Are there lobby buildings or front door?
So these are, I think it's a mix, to be honest, that, a variety of frontages that relate to different elements of the plan would be good and regulated that way. The slide is not up on this. So. But obviously these larger commercial buildings will have lobbies. So there'll be a mix of lobbies and a mix of, stoop or front door entrances and lobbies. So it's just getting that mix and that location of where certain frontages, whether it's a stoop or individual private residential entries versus lobbies is going to be something we're looking at in the mapping going further.
So We're gonna ask two questions now that are related. What, if any, storefronts will you preserve on D1 and D4? And what are the opportunities for Ricky's, CrossFit, etc. to stay within the plan? And for those of you who are, those are D1 and D4.
So we've met with both Ricky's and CrossFit, and
We're here tonight.
we're both here tonight. I don't see them really quickly, but so we've we need to further refine Ricky's. The use staying in the square. The physical location is an option to stay in the square if that's designated. It's a result that is possible. The CrossFit, which is behind us in this image, we spent some time with JT and talked about that as a use. They want to stay in the square. They really like being in the square, and that site could be redeveloped to accommodate them as well. So they could stay both physically in the square or choose to go elsewhere. But we wanted to leave both options open and allow that to those decisions and those discussions to happen further along. All right, next.
We're gonna switch subjects to process. Time is a very important context. In regards to the various D-lots, what is the timeline for the proposed changes? For example, when should people expect a rebuilt Bow Street?
I would love to enthusiastically say we can snap our fingers and make all this streetscape stuff just happen. These things take time. They really do. And one of the things they also take is money. There are a number of sources to be able to actually pay for particularly the streetscape. A lot of times the most possible way to do that is through the district improvement financing like we use at Assembly, which lets you grab something from the future tax benefit of development and use it to pay for the streetscape work. And then you really have to basically time each piece of upgrade to match the development that's going on around it. So you got to look at a full build out of an area like this, including the D parcels and Boynton Yards, is probably a 30-year project. So you've got to really look at the idea that we're going to put a plan together. I mean, you think about Assembly Square. Assembly Square put a plan together in 2002. I think the earlier plans were in late 90s, and you're seeing the results of it now. I'm hoping we can go quite a bit faster than that, but nonetheless, or at least get the beginnings of it going faster than that, but nonetheless, these things take time. So this is something that is an idea. By the fall, we hope to have these ideas formulated into a plan that is something that we can say, this is where we're going and this is what we're going to do. And then we need to look at the implementation steps to say, we're going to do this piece, and to do this piece, it's going to, we're going to do this one first and this one second, and here's the reason why this is ready to go and this isn't. But imagine that all of these are somewhere between a year and a half and 30 years away, depending upon kind of how things grow. How's that for a really wide-ranged answer?
All right, we're going to get a little more specific. If the public comment scenario results in building beyond the zoning height restrictions, how does that work?
We change the zoning. I mean, the short answer is, if the community consensus says you want a big public common and taller buildings, what I would do is I would basically set up a system. I mean, brainstorming here, I would say we give people the extra height. In exchange for that, we collect something to cover the cost of purchasing the land for the green space, and you use that extra height benefit to basically spread the opportunity so that you can afford to create the green space as a part of the whole project. I mean, one of the logistical challenges, just to be honest with you, is that big park sits on one person's land. And everybody who is in Boynton Yards is going to feel that their land value is the same based upon what the zoning value is, so we need to be able to do something to be able to make that all work in a way that works whole. We'll have to figure that out. One way to do that is to try to finance off the people who would have built on that land, kind of moving that development right into that height and then using that to be able to pay to get the park together. So it's a little tricky, but it's been done before in other places. We can figure out how to do it.
Many of the building plans include building specs, but no info about what the buildings will be used for. How will you communicate this to people who are not able to attend this presentation?
It's our intention, and we'll more carefully color code and label the colors. But yeah,
that two things is we're looking at the form first. How should it react to the neighborhood's desires and objectives, and then use right now. We want to make sure that there's flexibility for uses. And that's going to get determined with further study. And then the US2's master planning process will look very specifically at uses. And from our view on the neighborhood plan, we're looking at, well, what's the range of uses that could be accommodated so that both Summer Vision's objectives are met, that we can plan accordingly for infrastructure, and that it sets up an expectation in the neighborhood about what can be accommodated. But that might not be answered specifically by the neighborhood plan, and that might be very clearly defined by the US2 master planning process.
I mean, one of these blocks could potentially switch from a commercial building to a residential building. If that happens, though, one of the things that Summer Vision, that the comprehensive plan talks about, is having a certain amount of commercial development. I want to make sure another one switches back the other way to be able to balance that. So we do need to make sure that we keep an eye on the overall balance, but necessarily determining that, the one on the bottom of the park has to be commercial and the one next to it has to be residential. This is a logical potential way to do it, but it's not the only way to do it.
A related follow-up. How can we evaluate these plans without knowing the master plan? And perhaps if the person who asked this question can correct me, I think this means the plan from the master developer.
So
That's my assumption.
I mean,
Yeses? We have some yeses?
Okay,
Well,
well,
let me just add, some people are saying yes, that is the question, and other people are saying they want to know actually how can we evaluate these without knowing the full zoning overhaul?
I want to at this point put the idea together that, our original plan with the zoning overhaul was to propose the zoning overhaul, complete the Union Square plan, and then come back and make zoning changes in Union Square that would need to be made in order to implement whatever plan we do. The timing has gotten a little muddled on that as we're trying to figure out what the time schedule is going forward on the zoning overhaul as it relates to the time period going forward here. I would just say that my hope is that we would be able to build a collective vision of what we want in a neighborhood plan, of kind of where that brings us, what kind of development, how the streets feel, what's important. We've laid out one of the key things we've laid out here in the D blocks and in Boynton Yards is design as well as development principles of things that we want. We talked a little bit even about local business, about size of storefronts, about all those things. As we get feedback about that and we build that into a neighborhood plan, we can go, if we build a plan with community support, we can go back to the Board of Aldermen and say, here are the things you would change in zoning to be able to address that. Now, as far as the master developers planning, essentially their side, they're at this point, they're a stakeholder in this process as much as anyone else is, but they're also essentially looking to us to see where this process goes, to understand where and how they should go. And we and the city's consultants are trying to, it's nice to have a developer in the room because they give us a reality check. They certainly say, hey, if you do that, you're going to make this site completely unbuildable. It's nice to know those sort of things. At the same time, our first requirement is to make sure we're creating a plan that achieves all the goals of Summer Vision and achieves the goals of what a neighborhood plan should be. Okay, I admit we have a great fiscal impact consultant, and maybe at the next meeting or sometime in the future, I'd be happy to actually bring him here to give us a little bit more detail in a presentation to tell you more about it. I have been anxiously awaiting the fiscal impact numbers, and I got them yesterday, so I myself am still learning what they mean. Average annual impact, my understanding is the net increase in local taxes that this creates beyond the value of servicing the development itself. So you imagine you build a new development, it has costs, everything from kids in schools to impact on fire service to the need for the roads to be plowed, to all those other things that go with it. And you take what that value is, you subtract the value of those additional things to do it, and that the net benefit is what that average annual impact number is. But I'm still trying to figure out what a total versus an annual is on this myself. If somebody else knows this business, maybe they can help me.
Well, so
but we're going to bring that down to make sure people get more info on it.
Yeah, and we're in the second plan open house. We'll be covering fiscal impact in much more detail, and we've been looking at phasing and how this might build out and how that relates to the cumulative versus the annual.
Yeah.
So that there's some assumptions and some thinking that the fiscal impact analysis has been looking at based on a lot of the interviews of all the departments that we can bring back to you at the next plan open house.
I think what he's doing, right.
As well as how Union Square's impacts.
We're seeing the transformative areas in the D blocks. What about the rest of what's in that dash blue line?
So remember at Surratt we did some analysis of sort of the fabrication district about potential growth there. That thinking is still in process. We haven't let that go. So that. Yeah, so that would encompass some infill potential along Somerville Ave. That encompass the sort of the whole Ames sort of facility and the expansion of that. You know, well, we've looked at that from the charrette. We haven't progressed that since then. So that's still on the table for sure. All right. Okay.
You're out. There are a lot of community meetings and design charrettes in which residents brought up displacement and gentrification concerns. How is that very live and critical discussion informing the design process, or your process, which is the design process?
Good question. So the displacement and gentrification conversation has been happening a lot in City Hall, you know, and I think that's key to the understanding the policies that need to go in place for Union Square. A number of tactics are being discussed. I think we need to dive into this further at the next meeting. You know, sort of discuss that in very detail. Yeah.
Brad Rawson, who used to be the coordinator of this process until he became director of transportation and infrastructure a couple of weeks ago.
So there's an industry term that our partners at the SCC and elsewhere in the community use all the time, and it's the fundamental goal of this process: development without displacement. Right? I think that we would all recognize that today the existing condition is the inverse. Today we see displacement without development. And yes, I realize that there's been some construction here and there at a small scale. Many of the city and the public sector's tools to actually mitigate the negative impacts of price rises, whether we're talking about shopkeepers or family housing or housing for low and moderate income residents, are actually tied to harnessing the energy of the private market. So we're really interested in making sure that we flip that on its head. Again, the existing condition, displacement without development. And this process is rooted in the idea of development that can happen without displacement by essentially profit sharing, by channeling the energy of the market to deliver many of the social and economic programs that we're interested in.
Follow-up question?
Describing is what a lot of folks have been asking for out of a community benefits agreement. So what that all is about is asking the developer to sign an agreement that will cause them to spend some of the money that they're making on, you know, this very profitable endeavor to give back things that will benefit the community. Kind of like what you're describing. So it just seems like, I know that you all asked us not to talk about the community benefits agreement, but it's all tied together. Like, I don't see how I can talk about the form and function of the building without talking about a community benefits agreement, because that cost sharing, you know, the square footage of commercial space, all this stuff is related to the money we're going to make and how it can be related to community benefits.
So I wanted to acknowledge that there are 1, 2, 4, 5, 7, 8 questions here regarding community benefits agreements, and I think they're all important questions. You know, will there be a community benefits agreement? I understand that Somerville by Design is not the place to negotiate it, but when will we have the opportunity for a meaningful discussion? How does this work together? Will any of these proposals provide subsidies and support for small businesses or affordable housing? How are you treating the neighborhood plan and community benefits agreement as separate processes? How can we ensure that the design in a future community benefits agreement is accountable to the people who live here, and especially those most vulnerable to being displaced? It's great the CAC is involved, but they are not the sole representative of the community. What happened to suggestion for a community benefits agreement, community cultural center, preserving current growing space and programming for homelessness prevention? So I know Ed O'Donnell made an announcement about this at the CAC meeting last night. I don't know if you'd like to provide the answer you provided last night and give the insight into how far along we are and where we are on that thought at this point. It is not something we have forgotten. It is something that's very important to us in terms of figuring out how to discuss benefits from development and do it in a way that is really thoughtful and valuable. And you know, these have been done different ways in different places, and we're trying to understand a way that works for Somerville. I think Ed has more insight on this than I will.
8 questions, wow. My name's Ed O'Donnell, and I know the hour is getting late, so let me speak to the issue of a public benefits agreement. Public benefits agreement is not a new idea. When we initiated the process for the D blocks within the Union Square back in December of 2013, we made specific reference to the fact that we had every expectation that there would be a public benefits agreement that would result from the 7 blocks. And we put that right up front. We mentioned things that we all have in mind, that we all have in our hearts, whether it be affordable housing, open space, the need to protect the local businesses. So that has not changed. One of the things that my department has been charged with responsibility for is to look at a number of public benefits agreement, whether they be nearby in Boston or in Cambridge, whether they be in San Francisco, Los Angeles, whether they be of a vastly different scale. And we've looked at what works. We've looked what has stood the test of time. We've looked at, quite frankly, at some agreements that have not worked that well at all. And there are some common threads that run through all these agreements. And I think the most important are the fact that these agreements are either static, they address one particular opportunity, or they're backwards looking. And the fact of the matter is, that's not what we do here in Somerville. We try to do things a little differently, and we try to engage folks, and we try to look to the future. The fact of the matter is, yeah, we've got an immediate opportunity here in the 7 blocks that US 2 has been designated for, but quite frankly, this is not going to be the last time we as a city have the opportunity to talk about what we want, what we can reasonably expect, and set those goals and values. What we need to do in a public benefits agreement is something that's going to embrace our values and is going to give predictability, both to the folks who live here in the city and the folks who want to do business here in the city. And again, those are the issues that we all want to talk about, whether they be the displacement of folks, the protection of the local business areas. That's what we want to get to. And quite frankly, we've been working hard on it, and we're not ready to make an announcement, but I will say we have been working with a concern that is, I think, a leader in the form of Smart Growth that has experience in doing these things. So I wish I could make an announcement now. I expect we're going to make an announcement in the very near future, but it will be a process towards a public benefits agreement that will be a little different, that will not look like what they do in Boston or what they do in Cambridge or any place else. It will be unique to Somerville, and I want everyone to know that they will have the opportunity to participate in that process. I noted the comment that Benny made, that we should expect these developers to spend some of the money that they're going to make here to benefit the city. Couldn't agree with you more, but we can't reasonably expect this developer or any other developer to begin to spend that money until they know what the project is. And this is what this process is about, to talk about what we all want this project to be. So I want to invite everyone to stay involved. We expect an announcement in the near future, but it's got to be something that looks forward, because we're going to have the opportunity to have the same discussion, maybe not us, maybe our kids, but we're going to have the same discussion on the inner belt and Brick Bottom, and we need predictability, both for the folks who live here now and for the folks who want to do business here. So if there are any questions, I'm happy to try to answer them. I think we're not there yet. I think we've looked at agreements that have been signed between the municipality and the developer. We've looked at both. And as I said before, we think there's a different way to do it. So we're not there yet. So there's a third way. There's the Somerville. All right, so I just want to acknowledge that it's 8:35, and everyone who's left, you guys are real troopers. Raise your hand if you want to keep going, because there's more questions. That's less hands than I thought I'd see.
Oh, we just called you troopers, come on.
So we have a couple more miscellaneous, but we have hit every topic. And so I want to let everyone know that there are still some questions on the board that we will keep and address, so they're not going to get lost. But there are a couple of miscellaneous that we haven't hit. So that came, two ways to answer that is it's needed. We're meeting in the old post office for that exact reason. Second is the library. A lot of folks said, where'd the library go? So I think we've found, there's a site for the library on D1 potentially. There's a site for the library potentially at the corner of Somerville Ave and McGrath Boulevard. Once Target maybe retrofits, that's a really nice civic site. We've heard that might be too far away from the neighborhood center. So we're looking for another couple places that it could go to give the city and the community flexibility. But the library building itself as a meeting space, folks have said, well, let's look at how a library can do many different things and maybe include a lot of different stuff. So it would be a Somerville library, so it'd be different. So that's an idea we're looking at as well.
It really has a big community space sort of perspective in that idea. Do you have a follow-up on that one?
Yeah. Why are they calling it a library? Why aren't they called a media center or a community media center? Because library is part of.
No, that's a good question. I mean,
I'm saying it needs a name change. That's all I think.
I would have to divert that question to our library director and the library commissioners and the state library folks who we went to funding for it as to why and how they use that language to describe, because it really, the way I look at the programming of that building, it is so much more. Maybe even we need to redefine the idea of what library is, because it's more than just going and checking out a book and leaving. There's so many community spaces there. The children's room has so much programming to it that would bring a lot of families into the square and a lot of activity in, and just seeing the way you can kind of use the children's room space, seeing the way you can use the public space as a real quality public meeting space. It really is more than just library.
Why would you call it a museum, a library museum, to show what our kids what books used to look like, and the rest of it is a dedicated community center, media center,
Yeah. To me, whatever it is, it becomes the central civic activity that is a core piece of what is Union Square if we decide that's something we want here. And it actually surprised me how little conversation that got in the charrette, because it's something that I think is really interesting, but I don't know, I'd be interested as we go forward in this process getting more feedback on how much sense that makes to people would be really valuable. So, I mean, here's the thing, we've got questions up on the board still. What's up?
I think
we have questions up on the board. I think what I would like to do, a lot of people are kind of tired, but if you had a question that you want us to answer, I don't want to lose the opportunity for us to answer the question. So I think what I'm going to say is we can stay here a little bit longer, kind of with a smaller circle of chairs and answer questions for people who want to sit and ask questions. Or
yeah, so first off, thank you everyone for hanging out late night and all your help. We're gonna keep your eye on your inbox. We'll have an announcement for the second Plan Open House later this summer. We're gonna have folks on the planning team at each board. So if you have questions, over there are some of the development objectives for the D parcels over there as well. This is Boyne Yard scenarios in open space. And then this is all of the sort of intersection, sort of